سلام تخاتلت مدب أسنا زخب كتمالان دنب عد إنجليز ندات دالو زبتحكم زلو مدبنا مدب إيرتراويانيو أبز مدب زين عنان إيرتراويان زملكت قدات ندال علنا حساباتنا نقمت ألو دمتنا نقمت ألو خب كالوت ونسم علو مدبنا يو قرب تفائلنا أننا نيرنا حجن تمليسنا لنا أقداس بزخونا زعبا سون ناي سدتنياتات إيرتراويان بفلايك أب تجراي بحفشونا بإثيوبيا كن بفرلي بتجراي زلو سدتنياتاتنا بزملكت ناي مبزحتنا شغلوت كوينو سلازلو ناز قداي زي كما ينتهي بزبل قداي كم أنس استتححز نجارات كنا بروفيسور دان كونل عدي ما يقوله دان كونل نخلهنا إريتريان قاشا أيكونل he's almost an honorary Eritrean دخل بلو بزحت تجادل تتبع زخنا عركنا زلوا بزحنا قد لتاريخنا خاني زسندن زفلتنيو وخنجمرينا I welcome you Dan to my show once again. You're not guest to my show. You're not new to Eritreans, but you're most welcome. قاعد متذاكر.
يعني نعم.
I was a bit worried that I hadn't seen or heard from you for a few months, but then I heard that it was for a good thing. In fact, you were busy putting together the latest edition of one of my favorite books, Against All Odds, is it?
Yes.
So tell us about it. Well, how exciting. I can't wait to get my hands on it. But
well, first, here is the original.
Yeah, I've got the original.
Here is the new one.
Right. So what's new?
Well, if you look at
it's bigger.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have two answers to that. First of all, the original material written in 1993 is completely unchanged. I did not go back to rewrite anything. I made mistakes and miscalculations. They're all there.
Mm-hmm.
I added a short afterward in 1997, which was still optimistic about the future with some questions. And I asked questions at the end of that about the degree to which the people were being involved in the process of nation building and compared to the situation where they were being ordered to do things. Was there an organic interaction? You know, things like that. And the answer, of course, turned out to be no. They were objects, not subjects.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I still looked at the possibilities and was in the balance optimistic. What I've done since then is to write a considerable reappraisal. And I've added about 100 pages of new material to the book. Including 16 pages of photographs, mostly of the refugees and the situation that I've been researching. The material picks up in 1998 with the border war and its aftermath. The crackdown that took place in 2001 and the years after that on dissent with the arrests of the G15. And then in 2002, my ouster when I was PNG'd, basically banned from the country. And into the refugee situation.
Right.
And I, in 2014, I retired from teaching. And then I went into a full-time consulting relationship with the Norwegian Foreign Ministry on refugees and migration to begin with. And then increasingly, as time went on, we were looking at the issues of peace and security in the region. And the appraisal looks at the situation again. I'm self-critical of my own blindness at different spots. And the unwillingness to speak out until when I did, of course, my relationship was severed because that's the nature of things in Eritrea, as we all know.
As we all know.
And I carry it through the 2018 peace agreement and then the war that we're watching today. So the book basically ends in April at a time when the situation was considerably more unsettled in some ways than it is today, in Tigray at least. But I also end with some reflections on what it would take to get to peace. I think they still are quite valid. And what a transition, post-dictatorship transition in Eritrea would look like.
Right. All very interesting. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I saw that it wasn't available on Amazon, but I think Red Sea Press are the ones who published it.
Yeah. And actually, the Amazon is not discounting it. So if you're looking for the best price, you'll still get it from Red Sea Press.
Excellent. So we're all going there. And then I'll get my signed copy when you come to London. I can't wait. Right. It's really good that somebody is recording these things and somebody that knows can go back to the origin of things. But for those of us who are actually following from the kind of practice and from the advocacy or refugee support, and it's a very worrying time where, in fact, the situation with Eritrean refugees is at its most uncertain. There's all sorts of news, although it's very difficult to verify, all sorts of anxiety that is being pushed into the news. Could you tell us what you understand of what's going on in the refugee camps in Tigray with regards to Eritrean refugees?
By way of a quick contextual answer too, that my work over the last 7 years or so took me to, well, actually 9 years, took me to 19 countries to follow the refugee paths outward. And that included travels to the Middle East, to Sinai, to the area where the torture camps were, to Israel, interviewing survivors of the torture, and also others who were facing deportation or other problems from the Israelis. I traveled across Europe, traveled to South America, to Ecuador, and up through Central America to follow that route. I walked across the bridge into Texas, where many refugees were coming in. So I have a picture from that experience that gives me a broad sense as well as a very specific one. In the last, say, 3 or 4 years, I was going to Ethiopia about 5 times a year. 2 or 3 of those times I was in the camps. My most recent trip to the camps was in the end of, well, actually, I was in Ethiopia at the beginning of 2020 in February. I didn't get up to the camps then, but the crisis was already underway then, with the word that Ethiopia was changing its policy toward incoming refugees and no longer giving prima facie recognition of Eritreans as refugees, which it was a first. Up until that point, Ethiopia had been very generous toward refugees from all countries. All of its neighbors immediately got recognition if they came into the country and asked for it. So that was a signal that there was something going on. We, of course, learned after that Isaias and Abiy Ahmed had met in early January of 2020. And the result was the announcements that the policy toward Eritreans would change. And there was a report then that Hitsat's camp was going to be closed. And that was coming from Isaias's concern that the refugees were hotbeds of opposition at home. They were an embarrassment to him because he kept denying that they were there. and they were potentially problems that he wanted to get resolved and out of sight. Abiy, of course, cooperated, and that was really the beginning of the problems at that point. Now I was back in Ethiopia in April. I was in ADDIS. I didn't get up to Tigray, but I talked to people who had NGOs, international organizations, embassies, refugees, both Tigrayan refugees and Eritreans. In that case, it was difficult because everybody in that second category was frightened. So I had to meet people outside of my hotel, go to safe houses where we could talk and get their stories and then come back again. I've been in touch with people since that regularly over there. And actually, I was in Sudan also after that trip and met with people in Sudan, including TPLF, refugees, NGOs, again, UN and other people dealing with the refugees. So my picture comes from this. What I have seen happen is that the refugees in general have become increasingly precarious. The status has been difficult from the US and Europe in terms of getting in to the Middle East, to the surrounding area, and particularly, of course, in Ethiopia. I think it's well known now that the Hitsats camp was closed down. It was closed down by Eritrean troops who came into the camp along with Shemelba, the two northernmost camps, and closed them down. Burned a lot of the camp facilities that had been set up, including a new secondary school, a communal kitchen area, training areas for our people. I mean, it was just an extraordinary wave of destruction that corresponded with the destruction that the troops were carrying out in much of the rest of Tigray toward the Tigrayan population and toward the Tigrayan infrastructure. I have talked to refugees since then who were in those camps when that happened. They described a situation in which the troops came in, gathered everybody together, and then identified informants who had been embedded within the refugee community for sometimes months, sometimes a couple of years. And they in turn identified people they said were sympathetic to the opposition or were in some way opposed to the government. Some were shot and killed immediately. Some were then taken back to Eritrea. Others were told that they were at risk from the Tigrayan population and the militias, and they were herded up to Eritrea, many of which have since returned to Tigray. My understanding is that there are a large number of people in the surrounding area, in Shiraro rather, and in Shire, of course, and elsewhere in Tigray. They have been harassed, hunted by Eritrean forces up until recently, and they. The camps, of course, have been destroyed in the north. There are stories now about Eritrean troops trying to get through Tigray to the two camps that remain in Adi Harush and Ma'aini. And people there are very frightened of being caught in a crossfire at best, and at worst being actually taken prisoner and taken back to Eritrea. Now, the question, of course, the next question I'm sure you would ask is, how can they be protected? The lead agency up in Tigray dealing with the refugee camps, apart from the UN, has been the Norwegian Refugee Council. As we know, a week ago today, they were shut down, and along with Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, one of the other very active agencies dealing with refugees. So that the protection that they had from protection officers with these NGOs, the housing, the concern for unaccompanied minors, a whole host of activities that were under the NGOs is now suspended, and they're at greater risk than ever from a variety of places. I think this was the worst thing that Abiy Ahmed could do. I don't know whether this was at Isaiah's behest or if this was on his own. I know that Abiy is a populist, like the last president that we had here, Mr. Trump. He does very well when he's being adored by his fans. He doesn't do so well when he's being criticized. Jan Egeland, the head of NRC, has been very outspoken about the dangers of the situation in Tigray and the dangers to the refugees. And I think the refugees are now being punished by the Ethiopian government for that. And not just punished in the sense that they're getting fewer services, but they're put at much more serious risk. And that risk could come from Eritrean troops coming in. It could also come from traffickers who will prey on the young people. And if there are no protection officers there, if the camps are not operated in such a way as to offer that protection, then they're in great danger. Now, some people talk about moving the camps deeper south into the Amhara state. Given the situation of the Amhara and their involvement in the war and the fact that the war has spread to the Amhara state as well, I think that's a terrible idea. What the refugees in Tigray need is more protection where they are. They need more services, more food, but also security. And that security needs to extend not just to the people who are in Tigray, but to those who are in Addis Ababa and elsewhere in Ethiopia, because there have been refugees in Addis who have been hunted also by Abraha Kassa's security people who running around in Addis looking for them and others. So this is a big issue that needs attention. And I am very worried about them now.
Yeah, it certainly puts the refugees in a very, as you said, in a very precarious situation, because the government, the Ethiopian government, the federal government that is supposed to be providing protection, especially if with the move to Debark and deeper into the Amhara region takes place, is actually has got a military pact with the very government that is pushing them out. So in effect, in terms of as far as refugee protection is concerned, the regime in Eritrea and the federal government haven't got any, they don't have differences in terms of their political outlook. And so this is I don't know, this is a very difficult situation. What should we as Eritreans working with refugees, advocating for, what should we call? What is a realistic call to make to the international community?
Well, I think there has to be, as I said, increased protection in place from those that do have access. Pressure has to be put on Abiy Ahmed to withdraw his position on the other NGOs that are doing the critical work up there, and that are also witnesses to what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think we all should be worried about the absence of independent witnesses now. So that the international community has to be there, number one, and see the situation, and enable others to be there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, the whole situation, the whole context, the backdrop to all of this, well, not just the backdrop, the whole context of this is the war in Tigray. And where do you see things going? You've been you've written of the situation until April, but things have dramatically developed since then. Even yesterday, there was more dramatic developments with the fall of Lalibela to the Tigray Defense Forces and everything. Where do you see things going? There is talks of mediations here and there, interventions from the international community. Where do you see things going?
Well, in April, I was in conversations with TPLF and with other people in the embassies and so on about this. And there were a series of points that everybody seemed to agree on except the Ethiopians and, of course, the Eritrean government. And that was that no ceasefire was possible until the Amhara and Eritrean troops were out of Tigray. And that there was clearly backing away from trying to redraw boundaries by force. Second, there had to be a mutual recognition between the TPLF, TDF, and Abiy. And that TPLF was at that point ready to recognize him as the prime minister, even though they didn't like the way he got there or what he was doing. But they wanted full recognition of the TPLF as the legitimate leader of the Tigrayan state, and to go back to the status quo ante, basically, and the release of all Tigrayan political prisoners, the dropping of charges against them, and to start over again at a political level. At that point, they were talking about a kind of live and let live solution, where Tigray wanted more autonomy and recognition, and in turn would promise not to, pledge not to interfere in the rest of Ethiopia. I think the situation has moved from that point. And at that point, the balance of force really determined what were the demands and what were the possibilities, as is always the case in a conflict. The balance has changed radically in Tigray's favor now. And the situation in ADDIS has gotten worse toward Tigray and toward Tigrayans, with more people being hunted down there, more arrests, more detentions, and so on. So that the polarization has increased, and so also has there been an escalation of demands on the part of the TDF. So they're now talking about some kind of transitional regime, as you know. That, I think, is going to be a non-starter in terms of Ethiopia, unless they can actually get in and put ADDIS under siege, which is possible. But at this point, I would say that the possibilities are more or less what they were in April, but more, I think, more extreme in the sense that the urgency of getting the Amhara in particular out of Western Tigray is greater. The reports that we had last week of bodies floating down the Takazi River, the Satit as it gets into Sudan, were really very upsetting and indicate that the situation on that side is escalating. Now, the danger here is that this is going to lead to tit-for-tat vigilante attacks in both directions against the Amhara. So everybody who is concerned for peace here has to jump into this quickly to get this to a point where these sides back away from the positions and they go back to where they were before this war started, or wait for the fall of ADDIS. If you look at the situation, the military situation on the ground, the TDF has taken Lalibela and then turned west toward Bahardar. Mm-hmm. They are commanded by Saad Khan, general, who also led the forces in the last part of the overthrow of the Derg. They are following a somewhat similar strategy, coming at ADDIS from several different sides, including the Afar state. The next step would be not to attack ADDIS, but to put it under a kind of siege by cutting the road and rail connection to Djibouti, and by tightening up the encirclement from the north, from Bahir Dar. If we get to that, I think that the situation is radically transformed, and I think we're very close.
And yet, Abiy Ahmed, who it doesn't seem to be taking, I don't know if the facade is what is going on, but the facade, at least from where I sit, doesn't seem to be taking the situation with the seriousness that it requires. Like, he refusing to see Samantha Power, and also not being around. I just, this is the classic response that I am used to from Isaias Afwerki, but Ethiopia isn't Eritrea, and Ethiopia today is not even Ethiopia of the 1990s. The situation is very different. The country is huge. The economy is different to what it was. The connections and the significance of that part of the world is not what, it doesn't, the response from ADDIS doesn't seem to match the gravity of the situation. What do you make of that?
Well, I talk to people who are in ADDIS, and they say that on the street, people are behaving as if there's nothing going on outside of ADDIS. And they're not yet seriously affected. I think they're in a kind of a bubble there. Abiy has taken the same approach to the situation as, not to overdo the analogy, but that of Mr. Trump. You tell enough stories, false stories of what's going on enough times, and either people believe it, or they at least say, I don't know what to believe. Mm-hmm. And that's really what his tactic has been, is to sow misinformation at the deepest level. The latest attempt this last week was his spokesperson trying to suggest that the TPLF was responsible for killing the Tigrayans who were floating down the river. It was just ridiculous. But I think there are people who believe that in ADDIS, from what I understand. And the city and the government needs to feel more pressure before there will be a possibility of change. In the meantime, Abiy is behaving as if everything is going to turn around tomorrow. He's investing deeply in training new forces, and it reminds me actually of the Derg. If you remember the what is the march that was organized back in the mid-70s, and the other peasant campaigns, where they sent vast numbers of people who were only partially trained and unskilled in warfare into their these conflicts. The possibilities for Ethiopia are horrible from their side too. I don't know when people will wake up to this, but maybe it's not soon. That's the scary part. The other thing, of course, is the drones that Turkey has apparently helped build in Afar, or at least supply. And I think Abiy must be counting on those and his increased forces to turn the situation around. That in turn puts pressure on the TDF to act quickly, to make a difference. And I think the next month or so on the ground is going to be very important.
Is scary, no doubt about that, and particularly when you've got when you've got the situation of the peasants being being trained, when you've got a huge refugee population moving from one spot to the next. But where does all of this leave Isaias Afwerki and Eritrea? What do you pick up from that? And
well, the question for many years has always been, when do the Eritrean people say they've had enough? And so far, the answer has been, when they get to that point, they leave. It has for a long time been in the hands of the military to take action in Eritrea to change the situation. They're the only organized force capable of doing it. We hear stories, I'm sure you hear them as well, of dissension within the armed services, of meetings in which people have been openly critical of the leadership of Isaias and his small circle of disciples, so to speak, and yet we haven't seen any action. I think it's one of those things that when you do see an action, it will be sudden and sweeping. It will not be incremental. It can't be, because Eritrea's security system doesn't allow for that to happen. So it's very hard to read at this point. But the country is suffering also in terms of the economic situation. The cost of this war has been enormous for the Eritreans, but especially the younger generation who was sent out to fight it. And actually, Salam, there's another aspect of this that is very worrying to me, and I'm sure it is to you too. The subjection of many of these young people to being involved in such an ugly, brutal war is going to leave deep scars on the people who were asked to fight it. And one of the little stories that I tell in the reappraisal that I added to Against All Odds is of being in Uganda when I met with some of the escapees from the Lord's Resistance Army. You may remember that they were a cult-like organization under Joseph Kony, and they basically inducted young people into the force by engaging them in a circle around somebody who was trying to escape and was caught and was being beaten to death. If somebody in that circle didn't participate, they were thrown into the circle themselves. After a while, everybody became so brutalized that they were so affected by this participation that they really went numb. So when I interviewed people who had left, they had no affect. They just spoke in monotones. It was as if they were disembodied, telling somebody else's story. The post-traumatic stress for these young people is going to be very powerful, and they are going to need help and attention. And I know we're mainly focused here on the refugees in Tigray and elsewhere, and the Tigrayans, the Tigrayan people who have been victimized by this. But I think the soldiers who were sent to fight this war and turned into thugs, basically, have been victimized as well. And I think Eritrea's healing after this war is going to have to involve a lot of work.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, as a trauma researcher, that the level of brutalization and the level of collective trauma is phenomenal. And I mean, even before this war, the level of traumatization in Eritrean communities was scarily high, and this has, I don't know, amplified it by a much bigger value. And you can see the evidence everywhere. In Tigray as well, amongst the Tigrayans, and I'm sure now amongst the Amhara as well. So traumatization is going to be something that is going to continue to haunt us, and it will take quite a lot of effort. I mean, aid agencies are being evicted, especially Doctors Without Borders being not being able to operate. Like, you know, the very few handful, one or two organizations that were offering mental health support in the region.
MSF Holland was deeply involved in that, in the camps.
Yeah, and that is also worrying, and I'm sure we're going to to have to keep coming back to this, trying to unpick and, trying to put together a region that has been brutalized over a period of less than a year. And it's as if everything has been picked up and tossed upside down, and it's very worrying. The implications of all of this you've touched on. I'm going to conclude in a minute, but what are the implications diplomatically of all of this for Ethiopia and Abiy Ahmed in particular, but Ethiopia in general, particularly in light of the Ethiopia-US relationship that goes on back to the emperor and whatnot? What is it doing in terms of that relationship?
Well, it's putting it at risk. No, there's no question. The U.S. is still one of the largest backers of aid for Ethiopia, both emergency aid and developmental aid. And the relationship there is very strong and very deep, and of course has historic roots. But I think the situation is fraying, as we can see. And it's going to continue to, because American officials are going to continue to criticize the situation there and call for a peaceful solution, as Samantha Power did. She was much more diplomatic than she usually is in these situations. But I think she is trying to find a way out of this. And I think she, Secretary of State Blinken, and President Biden are all concerned with the situation. They have a deep investment in Ethiopia for strategic reasons, but if they have to, I think it will be suspended. I think they're considering more sanctions at this point on Abiy, and I know he will not react well to that. He gets in a deeper and deeper hole the more he continues to refuse to respond or prevaricates on the situation, as he has from the beginning. So I think that this situation may get worse before it gets better. But I think the U.S. interest here is in stability. For a whole lot of strategic reasons and national security reasons here, as well as concerned about the situation within Ethiopia. And the problem in Ethiopia is that if things continue to go the way they are, Ethiopia could splinter and devolve into warlordism and a spreading civil war that not only would affect Ethiopia, but could spread beyond its borders. The risk of conflict with Sudan, of course, is quite real, with Egypt getting potentially drawn in. Turkey and other countries have interests, and they're trying to manipulate the situation and gain an edge. So the whole diplomatic situation is unsettled. If Abiy takes a short-term approach and goes with those who will support him in this increasingly fraught situation, he could risk Ethiopia in the process. And he may do it. He may do it. He doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to end as badly as it looks like it may.
Yeah, scary prospects, and much wider than what this interview and the time that we have will allow. And I thank you for squeezing me into your busy schedule, both personally but also in your exciting in the exciting news of your book coming out and all of that. If you were to give advice as a respected elder also nowadays, what would it be? Not necessarily the doables, but what is your heart saying? What would you say to the leaders of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the region?
Well, first of all, I end the book with a little advice to my Eritrean friends and comrades. And I'm going to just read you a little bit from this. Asked what advice I have for Eritreans struggling with these questions in an interview, another interview, I had 3 suggestions and I will end with them now. First, have faith in the Eritrean people, their resilience and their inherent good character, and don't be distracted by the bad acts of individuals or organizations. The struggle for equality, social justice, and freedom never ends, so do not let yourself be paralyzed and disempowered by setbacks. There will be many. Learn from them. Look at the experience of others who have endured losses and bounced back. That's crucial, and that rarely happens for Eritreans. Everybody is so inwardly focused, which is, of course, part of the cult that Isaias has cultivated, the cult of nationalism. To focus only on Eritrea as your reference is political narcissism. Like trying to navigate a ship in a storm with a blindfold on. This is a trap laid by those who wish to control your perceptions and limit your understanding of options and possibilities. And think beyond immediate issues and obstacles at what comes next. This is in terms of not just Eritrea, but broadly the region. It is not only strategy and tactics that are needed, but vision. What do you think about when you imagine a future Eritrea? With that in mind, ask yourself how to get there one step at a time, but never abandon the dream.
Yeah, quite a lot to be considered there. Once again, I thank you, Dan, for graciously allowing me to pick your brain. No doubt I'll keep coming back to you both, openly like this, but also in our correspondences and what have you, because I really do value a lot of what you've got to say, and it has over the years added to the way I think and the way I also process things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salam, as well. And as I hope is clear, I am not a dabbler in this. This has become an integral part of my life. I care very deeply about Eritrea and where it goes. I am just concerned with the people leading it at this point, not with its future.
Right. It is very clear. It has been for a long time. ተኸታተልቲ መደብና ምስ ፕሮፌሰር ዳን ኮነል ዝነበርና ጻንሒት ኣብዚ ንውድእ ኣለና ብዙሕ ክንሓስበሉን ክንዝትየሉን ዘለና ጉዳያት ኢና ኣልዒልና ነርና ዘተናቐጻሊ እዩ ንሎም ዘለና ጻንሒት ግን ኣብዚ ንውድእ ሰናይ ቅንያት